My parents kicked me out the night before my sats, so my sister's wedding guests could sleep comfortably. She told me to live on the street. But her fiancé heard everything, and what he did destroyed the wedding. I'm 17 years old. I'm in my senior year of high school, and what happened a few weeks ago basically destroyed my family. But the truth is, I don't know if I really have that much of a problem with it. I know that sounds horrible to say like that, but when you get to the point where your own parents kick you out of the house literally the day before your SAT exams, just so your sister's wedding guests have a comfortable place to sleep, you kind of start to rethink what the word family really means, you know? I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand how we got to this point, because this wasn't something that happened overnight. It was more like the accumulation of years and years of basically being invisible in my own home. My sister Kimberly is 26 years old, and for as long as I can remember, she's been my parents' golden child. And when I say golden child, that's not an exaggeration. Like literally everything revolved around her. When I was like 8 years old and she was in college, my parents would drive 3 hours every weekend to see her. But when I had soccer games or anything at school, there was always some excuse for why they couldn't go. I remember one time I won a science competition in 6th grade, first place in the whole school, and my parents didn't even go to the awards ceremony because Kimberly had a dentist appointment that day and they wanted to take her. A dentist appointment. It wasn't even an emergency. But anyway, that's how things were in my house, and I kind of learned not to expect much from them. You know, you adapt to what there is. Things got particularly intense last year when Kimberly got engaged to Alexander. He seemed like a decent guy. Honestly, from the few times I saw him, he was always nice to me, asked me how school was going and stuff like that. Way more interested in my life than my own parents, which is ironic now that I think about it. But from the moment Kimberly announced the engagement, my house became a complete circus dedicated to planning the perfect wedding. My mom basically quit her job to help plan everything. My dad took out I don't know how much money from his savings to pay for the venue and catering, and I basically stopped existing completely. Don't get me wrong, I was already used to being the second course, but this was another level entirely. The wedding was planned for early November, and I knew it was going to be a whole event because Kimberly had invited like 200 people, literally, and my parents were happy to indulge her in everything. For months I heard conversations about flowers, dresses, the menu, the decorations, and honestly, it got to a point where I just put on headphones every time I came home because I couldn't stand to hear one more word about the damn wedding. But the thing is, I also had important stuff happening in my life, specifically the SATs that were scheduled for mid-October. These exams were super important to me because I wanted to apply to good universities and needed a scholarship because, obviously, my parents weren't going to pay for my education when they could barely stop talking about how much they were spending on Kimberly's wedding. I'd been studying for the SATs for months, like I took a prep course, had practice books, did sample tests every weekend, and I was super stressed but also excited because I felt like I was going to do well. My teachers had told me I had a good chance of getting a high score, and that was basically my ticket to get out of that house and start a life where maybe I'd matter a little bit. The exam was scheduled for a Saturday morning, 8 a.m., at a school like 20 minutes from my house. I had everything planned. I was going to go to bed early on Friday, wake up with plenty of time, have a light breakfast, and get to the testing center relaxed and ready. But then that Friday came, 2 weeks before the wedding, and my parents called me to the living room. I thought maybe they were finally going to ask me about the SATs or wish me luck or something, but no, my dad told me, we need you to vacate your room tonight because the wedding guests are arriving tomorrow and they need a place to stay. I just stood there, not really understanding what they were telling me, like I literally thought it was a joke at first. I told them, wait, what? I have the SATs tomorrow, remember? And my mom said, yes, we know. But Alexander's aunt and uncle are coming from far away and they need a comfortable room. You can sleep on the basement couch for a few days. I couldn't believe it. Seriously, I felt like I was in a bad movie or something. I explained to them that I needed to sleep well for the exam, that I'd been preparing for months, that this was literally one of the most important days of my life so far, but my dad just said, Logan, don't be dramatic, it's just one night. Alexander's aunt and uncle are older people and they can't be uncomfortable. You're young and you can adapt. The thing is, it wasn't just one night. They were asking me to vacate my room for almost 2 weeks because apparently they were going to have guests coming in and out constantly before the wedding. And when I pointed this out, my mom got angry and told me I was being selfish, that my sister's wedding was more important than a simple exam, and that I could take the SATs another time, but Kimberly was only going to get married once. I tried to reason with them. I told them I could change the SATs, but that it cost extra money and that the next available dates were in December, which was too late for some of my college applications. But they didn't care. My dad told me I had until 7 p.m. to get all my stuff out of my room because the guests were arriving at 9 p.m. I was in complete shock, like my brain wasn't processing what was happening. I asked them, "And where am I supposed to study? Where am I really going to sleep?" And my mom pointed to the basement like it was the most obvious solution in the world. The basement in my house is unfinished. It's cold, there's moisture, it doesn't have a door, and we basically use it to store old boxes and the washing machine. But supposedly I was going to be able to concentrate there and sleep well before the most important exam of my life. I went up to my room, feeling like I was going to have a panic attack. I started packing my stuff in a backpack, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely grab anything. I decided to call Kimberly, thinking that maybe she could talk to my parents, make them understand how ridiculous all this was. When she answered, she was super cheerful, talking about some hair trial she'd had that day, and when I could finally get a word in and explain what was happening, I thought she was going to take my side. But no, she literally told me, "Well, Logan, sometimes you have to make sacrifices for family. If you don't want to sleep in the basement, then go to a hotel or something, or live on the streets if it's that bad. But my guests need to be comfortable." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her, "Kimberly, I'm your brother. I'm 17 years old. How am I going to pay for a hotel?" And she just laughed and said, "I don't know. Figure out your life. I'm busy with important things," and hung up on me. I sat there on my bed with the phone in my hand thinking, is this real? Did my own sister just tell me to live on the streets? And the worst part was I wasn't that surprised, because that's how the relationship with her had always been. It was like 5 p.m., and I was completely lost, not knowing what to do. I couldn't stay in the basement. I knew I wasn't going to sleep at all there, and that I was going to completely ruin my exam. Then it occurred to me to call my best friend. I'm going to call her Sarah to protect her privacy, and I told her everything that was happening. Sarah is basically the best person I know. We've been friends since first grade, and she and her family have always been like a second family to me, or, well, more like my first real family, if I'm being honest. When I finished telling her the whole story, there was silence on the phone, and then I heard Sarah telling her mom what was going on, and literally 2 minutes later, her mom was telling me to pack everything I needed and that she was going to come get me. Sarah's parents arrived around 6:30 p.m., and when my mom saw that I was loading 2 big suitcases into their car, she came running out of the house asking what I was doing. I told her I was going to stay with Sarah because I needed to sleep well for my exam, and she got furious. She told me I was being ridiculous and dramatic. How dare I embarrass them like this with the neighbors? Sarah's dad, who's the calmest man in the world, told her very calmly that they were happy to host me and that Logan needed an appropriate place to rest before an important exam. My mom started saying that this was a family matter and they shouldn't get involved, but Sarah's mom interrupted her and said, "With all due respect, if you can't provide the basics for your son before a crucial exam, then someone else will." And we left. I cried the whole way to Sarah's house. I couldn't stop, like years of frustration and pain coming out all at once, and Sarah's parents didn't say anything. Sarah's mom just handed me tissues and told me everything was going to be okay, to focus on my exam, and that later we could talk about everything else. That night we had pizza. Sarah's family treated me like I was part of them. Her dad even asked me about which universities I wanted to apply to and helped me review some math concepts I was still struggling with. I went to bed around 10 p.m. in their guest room, a clean, quiet room with a comfortable bed. And although I was still super upset about everything that had happened, at least I could sleep a few hours. Saturday morning, Sarah's mom woke me up with enough time, made me a nutritious breakfast with oatmeal and fruit. Sarah's dad drove me to the testing center, and before I got out of the car, he told me, You're going to do an incredible job. Don't let anything that happened yesterday into that room with you. And honestly, I did my best. I sat there for 4.5 hours answering questions, and although my mind tried to wander to the whole situation at home, I forced myself to concentrate because this exam was my way out. It was my opportunity to do something for myself without depending on my parents for anything. When I came out of the exam, I was emotionally and mentally exhausted, and I had like 15 messages from my parents asking where I was, telling me I needed to come home immediately. How dare I leave like that? I didn't answer them. Instead, I opened my laptop that afternoon at Sarah's house and wrote a long message to Alexander on Instagram. I didn't know him super well, but I knew he was a reasonable person, and I felt he deserved to know the kind of family he was marrying into. I told him everything. Not just about that weekend, but years of stories about how Kimberly had always been horrible to me, how my parents constantly ignored me, how they made me feel like I didn't matter. I told him what Kimberly had said to me on the phone, verbatim, about living on the streets if necessary. Alexander answered me like 2 hours later, and I could tell from his messages that he was shocked. He told me he had no idea things were like that Kimberly had always painted a very different picture of her family for him, that he thought everyone got along well. He asked if we could talk on the phone, and when we did, I told him more details, and he was quiet for a long while and then said, "I need to talk to Kimberly about this. This isn't right." I don't know exactly what happened after, but from what I learned later, Alexander confronted Kimberly that same night, asked her directly if it was true. She'd told me to live on the streets. And at first she denied it, but then, when he showed her my messages with the exact quotes, she changed her story and said, yes, she'd said it, but it was because I annoyed her a lot and that she'd always found my presence irritating, even when we were kids. Alexander asked her how she could say something like that about her own younger brother. And according to what he told me later, Kimberly started saying that I'd always been dramatic and attention-seeking, that I exaggerated everything, that actually my parents treated me well and I was just jealous of her. But Alexander isn't stupid. He started asking questions about other things, about why I was never included in the family photos that were in my parents' house, why they never mentioned my achievements but did mention every little thing about Kimberly, and the more answers he heard, the more he realized that the family he was about to marry into was basically toxic and dysfunctional. That night, Alexander told Kimberly he needed time to think about the wedding, that he didn't feel comfortable marrying someone who could be so cruel to their own family. I didn't know any of this yet. I was at Sarah's house trying to process everything. Sarah's parents had told me I could stay as long as I needed, but I felt bad about imposing, although they assured me it was no imposition at all. Sunday morning, I started getting frantic calls from my parents, like 20 calls in a row, and I finally answered. My mom was crying hysterically, asking me what I'd done, saying I'd ruined everything, that Alexander was considering canceling the wedding because of me. I told her, I didn't do anything. I just told him the truth. And she yelled at me, how dare I bring strangers into family matters, that I'd betrayed my sister. My dad took the phone and told me I needed to fix things, that I had to call Alexander and tell him it had all been a misunderstanding, that I'd exaggerated things. I told them I wasn't going to do, and that because I hadn't lied about anything. And my dad told me that if I didn't fix this, then not to bother ever coming home again. And I don't know where I got the courage from, but I told him, okay, I have no problem with that, and hung up on him. I was shaking when I did it, because despite everything, these were my parents, you know? And part of me still hoped that at some point they'd realize what they'd done and apologize, but that didn't happen. Instead, my mom started sending me messages, begging me not to post anything about this on social media, not to embarrass the family publicly, and I realized that's what they really cared about. Not me or my feelings, but how they looked to others. That afternoon, I decided I needed to talk to someone else in the family, someone who wasn't directly involved in all this drama. I called my paternal grandparents, who live in another state about 3 hours away by plane. My grandfather answered, and I was so overwhelmed I could barely speak. But I told him everything. Not just what had happened that weekend, but everything. Years of being ignored, of feeling invisible, kind of watching Kimberly get everything while I didn't even get basic attention. My grandfather was quiet for a moment and then said, "Logan, why didn't you ever tell us any of this before?" And honestly, I didn't know what to answer because I guess part of me thought that's how life was for everyone, or that maybe I was the problem. My grandparents got really angry when I told them everything. My grandmother got on the phone and was crying, saying she couldn't believe her own son, my dad, had treated me like that. They told me they were going to fly there immediately, not to worry about anything. They also told me they were going to contact my maternal grandparents, who live even farther away but had always been good to me the few times I saw them. My maternal grandmother has health problems, so she can't travel. But when my paternal grandparents called them and told them everything, they also got furious with my parents. And things escalated really fast after that. My paternal grandparents arrived Monday afternoon and went straight to confront my parents. I wasn't there for that conversation, but my grandfather told me later that they basically told my parents they were a disgrace. How could they treat their own son like that? That they were so blinded by Kimberly, they couldn't see the damage they were causing. My parents tried to defend themselves, saying I was exaggerating, that things weren't that bad, but my grandparents didn't believe them at all. While all this was happening, Alexander finally made a decision. Tuesday morning, he and Kimberly posted on their social media that the wedding was postponed indefinitely, that they needed time to resolve some personal issues. I wasn't on social media at that time because frankly I didn't want to see anything at all. But Sarah told me people were super confused in the comments asking what had happened, and that Kimberly was frantically deleting all the comments. My parents called me again, but this time it was just my dad, and he was calmer, but you could also tell he was desperate. He told me we needed to talk in person, that things had gotten out of control, that the family was being destroyed. I told him I was willing to talk, but only if my grandparents were present, because I didn't trust that the conversation would be honest if it was just between us. We met on Wednesday at a neutral restaurant. It was me, my parents, and my paternal grandparents. It was super awkward and tense. My parents tried to say they were sorry things had been misunderstood, but my grandparents interrupted them and told them to stop acting like this was a simple misunderstanding, that there was a clear pattern of favoritism and neglect that had lasted years. My mom started crying, saying she loved us both equally, but I couldn't hear that anymore. I told them, their actions showed otherwise, that I couldn't remember the last time they'd gone to anything of mine at school, or that they'd asked me how I really was. The conversation didn't get anywhere productive. My parents couldn't fully admit what they'd done. They kept trying to minimize it or justify it, and I realized there wasn't going to be a real apology or genuine change. My grandparents saw the same thing I did, and after the meeting they told me they'd been talking with Sarah's parents and had a proposal. Sarah's parents had offered that I stay with them until I graduated from high school, which was only like 8 more months, and that my grandparents would cover any additional expenses this involved, although Sarah's parents insisted it wasn't necessary because they wanted me there anyway. The other part of the proposal was that my parents sign papers ceding primary custody to my grandparents legally. Because although I was already 17 and technically close to being an adult, my grandparents wanted to make sure my parents couldn't try to force me to return or cause legal problems. When my grandparents presented this proposal to my parents, I expected there to be resistance. That maybe they'd finally realize how serious everything was and fight for me. But no, my parents signed the papers after only 2 days of thinking about it. My mom tried to make it look like it was a sacrifice they were making for my benefit, saying that if I was going to be happier with other people, then she respected that. But the truth was, they were probably relieved not to have to deal with me while they planned another date for Kimberly's wedding. While all this was happening, Alexander had been doing his own reflection. He sent me a message like a week after everything saying he'd broken up with Kimberly, that the more he thought about how she'd talked about me and handled this whole matter, the more he realized she wasn't the person he thought she was. He told me he was so sorry he hadn't known before how things were, and I told him it wasn't his fault, that Kimberly was an expert at showing a different face to people outside the family. They officially announced the wedding was completely canceled like 2 weeks later. And according to what Sarah told me, who was still checking social media, Kimberly had a complete public breakdown, deleting and re-uploading posts, blaming everyone but herself. Now it's been like 6 weeks since all this started, and I'm not going to lie, it's been weird but also liberating. I live with Sarah's family. I have my own room here. I have dinner with them every night, and they treat me like one of the family. My grades at school have improved because I'm not constantly stressed or waiting for the next time they're going to make me feel bad. My anxiety levels have gone down so much. Like I used to have panic attacks like twice a week, and now I haven't had one in over a month. My grandparents talk to me on the phone like 3 times a week. They visit me every 2 weeks, and they're helping to plan my college future with me. My parents have sent me some messages. It's always my mom, saying they miss me and hope someday we can work things out, but there's never a real apology or acknowledgement of what they did. Kimberly hasn't contacted me once, which honestly is a relief. Sometimes I feel guilty for causing her wedding to be canceled, but then I remember I didn't cause anything. She caused all this with her own actions and words, and Alexander was lucky to realize the kind of person she was before marrying her. Last week, I was helping Sarah's mom make cookies, something I'd never done before at my house because my mom was always too busy or didn't want me to make a mess in the kitchen. And she asked me how I felt about everything. I told her the truth, that I felt sad about losing my family, but also relieved to be out of that situation. And she said something that stuck with me. She said, "Logan, you didn't lose your family. You found a better one." And I think she's right. I don't know how things are going to be in the future, if my parents will ever really understand what they did, or if Kimberly will ever stop being so selfish. But what I do know is that I'm in a better place now, surrounded by people who really care about me, and that's more than I had before. My SAT results came a few days ago, and I got a 1480, way better than I expected considering everything that was happening that day. And when I told Sarah's parents, we celebrated with my favorite cake. My parents didn't even know what day the results were coming.